All right, we are back with another special edition for you. Our special guest is a world renowned musician, co founder, bass player, songwriter, backing vocalist, and much more of the original Alice Cooper group. It is Dennis Dunaway.
Hi, Jay.
Dennis, welcome, welcome. Always great to see you. You know, we're talking about these chapters of time. In some way, this music feels like it's timeless, like it came out last month or last year. I know it might seem three lifetimes ago to some people, but it is very much reminded how relevant and vital it is with this new reissue by Rhino, which we're going to talk about. But we're talking about Love It to Death, the third studio album by the original Alice Cooper group, released on March 9th, 1971. And of course, it was recorded in Chicago, RCA Mid American Recording Center. Jack Richardson and Bob Ezrin joining you guys. And Dennis, when you look at the first two albums, you're here in LA, it's the Frank Zappa, family and all that. There's things to enjoy and appreciate. And it certainly shows where the band evolved from. But in relation, so many people feel Love It to Death was really the beginning of the hits, the radio, the sales, the all that. How do you look at those first two albums?
Well, it's certainly unusual for a band to get a second chance, and then for a band to get a third chance was almost unheard of. So we were very lucky. We had two albums where we were still learning our craft, and then finally we got a third chance and managed to get our foot in the door that time.
Now, this album, Love It to Death, you were still under that Frank Zappa contract when this was started, right? Warner Brothers eventually bought it out from Zappa. Tell us about that process. At what
Well,
point did Warner step in and say, "Hey, you guys need a lot more muscle. You need a bigger promotion department. Why don't we just write you a check?"
yeah, well, I wasn't the business guy in the band back then. All I thought about was the creative side of it. But I believe it was Reprise Warner Brothers that said, "Hey, come with us, and whatever legal issues pop up, we'll take care of it," which wasn't really the case in the long run. But I think even on the very first album, Pretty's for You, Frank wanted to add us to the roster, but his manager, Herbie Cohen, said, "Hey, we can't afford to add another group to the roster." That's why it was a rush job from midnight to sunup. We did, Pretty's for You in a really mad rush. In fact, some of those songs recorded were just us warming up, getting ready to record. And then Zappa said, "It's a take." And we're like, "We didn't even do the song yet." But, and then Easy Action, we really forced the issue because they had kind of decided to drop us, Herbie Cohen did. And we went in the studio and recorded and billed it to them anyway because we were still under contract. So Reprise came along, and Warner Brothers had already turned us down. They saw us at the Whiskey A Go Go, and passed on us. But now we had a reputation, with the chicken and all of that, and we had definitely gotten an underground following. So this time, because we got Jack Richardson involved, who had a string of hits and a reputation for recording albums.
The Guess Who?
Yeah, big hits. I mean, we would be driving around the country in the station wagon with a dashboard speaker, and whenever a Guess Who song came on the radio, it jumped right out of the dashboard at us, and we said, we need that guy to produce us.
Yeah.
And so we bugged Jack Richardson to death. I mean, the management, everywhere he went, there would be messages from our managers, "Hey, you have to listen to this band." And so he sent Bob Ezrin to New York City to hear us, and Bob loved the show, and so things fell into place. Then Warner Brothers was willing to sign us because they had somebody that was almost a guaranteed hit at the helm, Jack Richardson.
So when you started recording Love It to Death, this was under the wing of Reprise. Was Warner in control and basically working it out with Cohen and Zappa?
I think the Reprise thing was a real quick transition. I think we just ended up right on Warner Brothers by the time we recorded this.
Okay.
But the deal was, you know, Jack Richardson was there overseeing the recording sessions in at RCA Mid Atlantic Studios in Chicago.
Yeah.
He was there for Killer album as well, but because Bob Ezrin had never produced anything, Warner Brothers said, "Well, Jack Richardson's got to oversee this. You know, he's the guy with the
Sure.
hits under his belt." And we showed up in Chicago, and Jack Richardson was wearing one of his wife's flowery dresses, and he had a baseball bat, and he's and that was his way of saying, "Hey, you guys with your image, you know, I'm still in charge."
Wow. Well, of course, the band, the late great Glenn Buxton, Michael Bruce, Neil Smith, and yourself, along with Vince on vocals, harmonica. You guys now are making the record that would change your life. Obviously, the song "I'm 18," co-written by yourself, Vince, Michael, Neil, and Glenn Buxton, was the one. And of course, we talked about the story of Bob Ezrin coming to see you at Max's Kansas City in New York City and re- remarking that song, I'm edgy," is that's the one, you know. But I'm 18 is actually what it was called. But I'm sure the PAs and the haze of Max's kind of blurred the sound a little. Of course, "Caught in a Dream," "Long Way to Go," "Black Juju," "Is It My Body," "Hallowed Be My Name," "Second Coming," "Ballad of Dwight Fry," and "Sun Arise." Um, was it pretty much determined? Did you have the songs ready to go, or was there a lot of work on arrangements and song selection during the process of recording?
Well, during the Pretties for You era, we were very artsy. We weren't thinking about a hit single at all. We just wanted to do this artistic thing that had never been done before.
Yeah.
And then we decided that we were too hungry to keep doing that. So we decided we were going to do more relatable songs. And on Easy Action, we got pulled into the studio before we were ready. I mean, we didn't even have half an album's worth of material ready, but we were already well on our, if we had had enough time and a rehearsal space, because we were living out of suitcases on the road at the time, if we would have had time and a rehearsal space, we would have, Easy Action would have sounded a lot closer to what Love It to Death was.
Hmm.
But it was rushed into the studio. But by the time we got to meet Ezrin, Michael Bruce in particular had done a lot of woodshedding, learning his craft and stuff. And songs like "Caught in a Dream," Ezrin hardly even changed around at all. Where "I'm 18," the most important song, was a long sprawling with a big blues intro on organ and stuff. And he's like, "Well, we got to get rid of the intro, you know?" And we're like, "But we like the intro." And so he taught us how to uh, take a song apart and take it down to just the bass and drums and get that tight. Uh, and and he was especially uh, understanding that Neil and I were going to take our parts to the moon and back before we were going to try every possible part that we could think of and then decide on what we thought was the best between us. And Bob Ezrin allowed that to happen, which we were pretty chaotic in the rehearsal studio, Neil and I, but we also would change songs, take them in a unique direction because of that.
Well, of course, I'm 18 ended up being under 3 minutes long on the album, 2 minutes and 59 seconds to be exact. But that's what radio wanted. They wanted 3 minutes or under.
Three
We didn't
minutes
want
was
four,
required.
five,
I mean,
6 minutes.
which would have been a very long single for Elvis in his era. That
Yeah,
was more like 2.5 minutes.
sure. Yeah, the Beatles, you're in, you're
Three
out.
minutes, 3 minutes. So for AM radio, but
Yeah.
also FM radio was big back then because they would play the longer versions, So you had Light My Fire, the short version for AM, and you had the long version for FM. Well, we had Black Juju, which was sprawlingly long, and that got a lot of play on FM radio.
Yeah, the DJ needs a pee break or a joint break.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
Inagata Davida came in handy.
Inagata Davida, there was a disc jockey in Phoenix, Arizona, that every day at sundown, he would play the long version of Inagata Davida. And therefore, Iron Butterfly were gigantic in Arizona. And when the Alice Cooper group first came back from feeling successful from our days in Los Angeles, we opened for Iron Butterfly at the Coliseum in Phoenix, and it was jam packed. But you think, okay, Iron Butterfly were gigantic because the DJ needed a pee break.
Yeah, yeah, a whole side of a record, man. It really came in handy. No,
It
no
was a great
question.
song, though, and the recording of the drums was amazing on that.
Well, after Easy Action, which showed off the band, so to speak, shirtless, front and back. This one really showed what some may call the goth side, the dangerous side of the band. Um, Tell us about the album cover shot. Who was the photographer, and did you have the shot in mind, or was this the one picture out of many different setups that
Well,
worked?
the other guys don't remember this, but briefly, when we were developing the songs uh, for "Love It to Death," we had songs that were positive, the light
Uh huh.
songs, and we had
The
songs like
white and
Black
the dark.
Juju and a ballad of Dwight Fry and stuff that were on the darker side. And so initially we thought, okay, the front cover will be dark and the back cover will be light, and the songs on the album will be the same. So we would have one side of the album with all the positive songs and the other side with all the dark songs. But that's not that was a brief thing, but that was happening when the photo session went down with Roger Prejean in New York City. We were in this empty theater, and all we had was a spotlight in front of a movie screen. And he was up on a ladder. And so we did the dark shot and the light shot.
Wow. So there was a lot of pictures to choose from that shoot, or did
Uh,
you
yeah,
have?
I mean, that's the sign of a great photographer. They take tons of pictures and then you have a good one in there.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't remember
the
seeing.
selection process.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing. We had final say on all of our. We had artistic
Okay,
control back then, so I'm sure we saw the little sheet that had all of the
the
pictures
proof
on it.
sheets. Yeah.
Proof sheet, thank you. Uh, but uh, but the band would choose the picture, and then of course the management would show it to the record company, and we would want them to have approval, even though we had final approval. So a lot of fans say that the picture on the back, the light picture, is their favorite picture of any rock group ever. But I prefer the menacing one on the cover. And
Yeah.
Alice didn't plan the thumb thing, by the way.
Okay. Yes. Always some angle for controversy. Definitely.
Yeah, controversy was good. That's how you sell records.
Yeah. A little chicken went a long way. That's for sure. but yeah, and of course, them being Canadian, we used to hear the stories of Toronto radio, maybe even jumping on I'm 18 even before you might have heard it stateside. Was that true? Living up there in Michigan,
Yeah,
pick up Toronto radio.
at the time, for some reason, uh, it had just American radio had just now started playing Canadian content, Canadian bands, and
Okay,
that's because of Jack Richardson with the Guess Who. He
all right.
kicked open the door because before that, Canadian bands, for some reason, just didn't get airplay in America. Therefore, Canada would decided, okay, well then we're not going to play anything that doesn't have Canadian content.
Mm,
And because we had Canadian content with Ezrin and Richardson, it was actually CKLW out of Windsor, Canada, which is right across the border from Detroit. You go through
okay.
the tunnel from Detroit and you're in Windsor. And Rosalie Trombley, they called her the girl with the golden ear because when she played a song, it became a hit. And she made hits for Bob Seger and a lot of different bands.
Yeah.
But she started playing I'm 18, and there because they were across the river in a different country, they didn't have the restrictions of their how widely their tower could
Oh,
broadcast.
sure.
They covered the whole Midwest in America and Canada, which included Toronto, which we I think Toronto was the first place city that really understood what we were trying to do at the time.
Okay.
But years later, I talked to Rosalie, and I was in Phoenix, Arizona, in a bar late at night because I couldn't find another place to find anything to eat. And a guy comes over and says, "Hey, you're Dennis Dunaway. You know, my mom is Rosalie Trombley." And go, "Oh, how cool!" He said, "She's over here. You want to have a martini with her?" And which turned out to be a giant martini. But first time I got to sit down and talk to her since the old days. And I said, "So what was it about I'm 18 that made you think it was a hit?" She said, "By the time I got to the end of the first verse, I already knew it was a hit before she even got to the chorus."
Yeah. What's that rite of passage? You're a teenager, you kind of rebelling with your parents and school and authorities, and you want to be taken seriously as an adult, and
Right. And
certainly,
the band had been at Warner Brothers, and we saw these charts on the wall. Some of them we weren't supposed to see. It was like if a band had a hit album, great. And then if the next album didn't do as well as the other one, they were ready to drop them. I mean, it was like
yeah, you're on the hot seat.
this week's flavor of gum. But we asked one of the A&R guys there, what's the biggest selling age group? And he said 18 because you're still living at home, but you have a job, so you have money. And we said, okay, we can relate to that. We all went to school together, so
Yeah,
so we're gonna write a song for that 18-year-old.
that is amazing. Of course, what hit on the radio, the gigs are getting bigger. You're going from the middle of the slots to headlining and different shows, and obviously, the Peace Festival in Toronto. Had this already happened before this album, or did this happen during the sales of this?
No, it happened before that album.
Okay.
We were still doing mostly "Pretties for You"
Okay.
at that point. And the Toronto piece, you mean with John Lennon, that one?
Yeah, yeah, that one with the
Yeah,
John.
because we had played in Toronto quite a bit before that, and even gigs at Varsity Stadium where that took place.
Okay.
But yeah, so we had the reputation. In fact, that's another thing Rosalie Trombley told me. She said about the third day of her playing I'm 18, all the other DJs came into her room and said, "Hey, you know this band had the chicken thing and all this. You can't." And she said, "Oh, so you want me to stop playing our most requested song of all time?" And she said, it couldn't have been timing couldn't have been more perfect because the phones were ringing off the hook for requests for I'm 18, and it was so requested that they moved it into every fifth song. I mean, Beatles, Doors, Hendrix, you name it. Every fifth song was I'm 18 at the time.
Wow. So that's like every 20 minutes, you know?
I was even, I know this is an exaggeration, but I almost felt like I was getting tired of hearing it on the radio myself.
I know I've heard people say, they got a hit on MTV and it's being played every 20 minutes and they're like, enough already, Dad. Come on. I'm
Well,
sick of that.
in this,
There is a chance of being burned out. That's for sure. You want that slow and steady gain as opposed to, repulsion.
honestly though, we had written so many songs that we would in the future, like Jack Richardson would say, if I had one note that I didn't like in a recording, he would make me record the entire song again. I'd say, well, why don't we just punch in for that note? And he said, hey, man up, you're going to be playing this song a million times in your life. You can do it one more time here. And that's true. But I'm thinking of certain bands that have hit singles that I would probably just get so sick of playing over and over if it became a hit and that was our hit that I had to play. Of all of the Alice Cooper songs, I to this day I enjoy playing every single one of them every time. I don't get bored at all.
Yeah. Well, it is an anthem. And I've always said, of course, Schools Out is one of the all time anti-authority rites of passage anthems. But I'm 18 came prior, and it kind of puts you on the map. Who didn't raise their fists in the air? Especially if the drinking age was 18 in your state. You're like, I'm legal. I can buy cigarettes. I can buy beer. But I know some states were 19 or 21. So, but 18, there's a lot of laws that you are now your own person. You're an adult. You are responsible.
That was the other thing about it breaking out of Canada because the drinking age was lower in Canada.
Yeah.
So that tunnel from Detroit to Canada every weekend, all the kids would go over there to party and then come back.
Oh, yeah. Well, I lived right below Vancouver in Bellingham, the last city in America on the West Coast. And the same thing, the pilgrimage to the bars of British Columbia, it's,
Yeah, Vancouver's beautiful. I was born in Oregon, so similar kind of
oh,
country.
yeah, Washington, Oregon, British Columbia. I love the West Coast. From San Diego to British Columbia is easily one of my favorite parts of the country. And
So we did a big festival up there, Seattle Pop Festival. The first year we did it was in Seattle, Washington. The second year it was in Vancouver, up in the
okay,
mountains. But okay, so as far as so we thought Pretties for You was going to set the world on fire. Zappa had played it for the Beatles before it was released and said they all loved it, and we thought, great, this is good, and then wah wah. But we barely made the charts. Then Easy Action, we thought, oh, there's some good stuff on here. It's more relatable, and then wah wah. So, but we did barely make the charts again. So now, even though Bob Ezrin had come to the farm to whip these songs into shape with us, which was great, uh, we walked in the studio in Chicago feeling, okay, again, we think we've got the goods, but we're not going to be popping any champagne until we get a hit. And with Jack Richardson at the helm, and Jack didn't necessarily produce it. Jack definitely pushed Bob Ezrin to the front of being in charge, but Jack Richardson, anytime he thought we were wasting time or there was a faster way to get something done, he would jump in and take over and straighten that out because he wanted to live up to his reputation of delivering an album under budget and with a hit. And the other thing is, back in those days, we didn't run a track to a click track. We would because for one thing, we had songs that had tempo changes within the song. So Jack Richardson, there were a bunch of aluminum ashtrays in the control room, and he would just empty one of those and turn it over and tape it to the desk, and then put the talkback microphone down to it, which we could all hear in our headphones. And he'd have a drumstick and just bang away on that thing to keep the tempo going between all of us because we were so excited. Neil and I had a tendency in those days to be off to the races here and there. But so that was great because Jack Richardson was a big personality. When he walked into the room, uh, he required you to do your best or better than you've ever done. And he was such a nice guy that you worked extra hard to deliver on that. And then we had Bob Ezrin, who was just always enthusiastic, no matter what happened, enthusiasm, you know. So so it was all good. All we had to do is play the songs the way we had rehearsed them, and and wait and hope that finally we would be able to break into the upper end of the charts rather than the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, what a special time the early 70s were. You look back at what was happening in England, the birth of the glam and glitter movement, T Rex and Bowie and Mott the Hoople and Sweet and Slade and all that. And simultaneously, you guys were creating your own image. And I'd seen that Glenn Buxton had started to paint circles under his eyes with cigarette ashes, kind of a cheap makeup uh, step towards real goth and makeup. You guys were always able to take a dollar and stretch it in production value. And of course, your lovely wife, Cindy, was integral in helping you make these outfits. Talk about Cindy's role at this point, the outfits you have on the cover of Love It to Death and the subsequent tour.
Well, by then, Cindy had lived with the group for a while, uh, and we relied on her to be able to make outfits. I mean, for the silver jumpsuits that she did for the Love It to Death uh, tour, which started with us playing a gig at the Easttown Theater, and I think it was New Year's Eve or Christmas Eve, and we were going to do 2 nights in a row. And Bob Ezrin played keyboards with us. But all of these songs were fresh. We were really tight because we had just recorded the album, and we played like the single version of I'm 18 live rather than the sprawling one, which we usually did. But the concept of that particular show, because we tried to make every show different, was we wanted the stage to be so bright and shiny that the audience would have to squint their eyes to be able to see what was going on. So we got this corrugated aluminum, shiny chrome looking aluminum, and that was the backdrop behind Neil. And then we had shiny, brand new garbage cans, and we all wore these shiny chrome suits, including Alice. His had a hood. Uh, and and then we had extra bright spotlights on the stage. So it was really bright, which we thought, okay, well, this will set us apart from all of the other bands that are out there that are doing heavy music because most of them, everything has to be dark, right?
Yeah.
So, so Cindy, she just found out, she's writing a book now, but she just found out in her diaries that she got $25 to go buy material and make those silver jumpsuits.
Oh, wow.
Now,
She didn't spend it all in one place.
so with yeah, so with Cindy, and also she didn't have a sewing machine or anything. So Alice's girlfriend at the time, her mother had a sewing machine. So Cindy went over there and stayed up all night, a couple of nights. I think every time Cindy made costumes, it was like give her the material and she goes into a room and in the morning you get the goods. but so the thing we didn't know, this fabric was stretch fabric and it was shiny chrome, and it had metal in the fabric. And what we didn't anticipate as men, in those days, you had to make sure everything on stage was grounded or you were going to get a shock. And, and especially when you were playing and got sweaty, then it was a wet shock. And you would go up and you would touch the microphone and you'd have to touch each other. If I touch, you'd hold your strings and touch the other guy to make sure we were grounded because you could get a shock from just touching the other guy on stage. So you'd get all that. But I remember one night, man, I walked up to the microphone and my lips touched the microphone and I saw lightning.
Wow. Yeah, things have changed for the best. Now you can perform in a thunderous rainstorm and still be safe. But
Yeah.
yeah, back then there were many tales of electrical currents running
Oh,
through
yeah.
musicians.
A lot of the sound check was just to make sure everybody was grounded.
Wow. Well, obviously, that Detroit scene, with Iggy and the Stooges and MC5 and, George Clinton's Parliament Funkadelic coming up, and of course, Ted Nugent and Amboy Dukes, you know, how much do you credit that, that breeding ground of Michigan in really growing this album and subsequent, creations from the band? How important was it?
Extremely important. I mean, you just named not even half of what was going on in Detroit at the time. I mean, there was some other bands that people outside of Detroit might not remember, but a lot of great bands. And the thing is, the MC5 pretty much had everybody else in a headlock because they were the main attraction there. But they were kind enough to not reject what we were doing because we came in with the pretties for you kind of stuff. And then we realized, hey, they're going to run us out of town on a rail if we don't get heavy because in Detroit at the time, if you did a ballad, the lines would line up for the bathroom. It's like
Sure.
everything had to be fist in the air, which was also interesting because uh, Detroit was fist in the air. We're gonna anti-establishment. We're gonna, make the world better. And then you cross the border into Canada, and everything was give peace a chance, which
Wow.
which is the same goal, but coming at it from two different angles. But Detroit, the Stooges in particular, because we did a lot of shows with the Stooges at the Easttown Theater.
Okay.
The Grandy Ballroom is where the MC5 played mostly, but there were tons of festivals organized by Mike Quattro,
Oh
one
yeah. Susie Quattro's older
Susie and
brother.
Patty, the Quattro sisters. Well,
Yeah.
that was the brother. And when he was a kid, he was like a child prodigy that won on the Ted Mack Amateur Hour. I don't
Oh,
know who can remember that, but that was a long time ago. And
yep.
he won a Hammond organ. And he would play this Hammond organ. He'd organize the whole festival and he would open the show. And it would be just him with his Hammond organ and maybe a drummer or whatever. And then it would be, Cradle with Susie and her sisters. And I mean, other bands. Mitch Ryder had Detroit. What an amazing band that was. You had Steve Hunter and all of these. He was in Detroit actually at that point. But Catfish, a great blues band. SRC, great band. Uh, but one of the things that kept us going is we weren't trying to compete with the MC5 by playing at the Grandy Ballroom that often. We were across town with the Stooges, and we did quite a few shows there, and kind of pulled the crowd away from the Grandy at that point. And also we had more freedom, and we also had a crowd that kind of felt like, hey, we've got our thing happening. We're not doing, what they're doing on the other side of town necessarily. But all these festivals brought everyone together. We would play outdoor festivals that would go all day long for a couple of days, and it would be every every Detroit band. I mean, I think Detroit was as loyal to their local bands as San Francisco was at the time.
Sure. And of
It
course, you
was
have one of the biggest, college crowds there at Ann Arbor, and of course Flint. You had Grand Funk coming out of there, and it was so vibrant. But as you say, very blue collar. The Motor City was, um, the car factories, the automobile factories, Chevy and Ford and all that. GM were the biggest employers there. So
yeah, all of I mean, everybody that we knew in Detroit had worked on the automotive factories at one point, and they were tough. I mean, you go to Flint, Michigan, or Toledo, and these various towns, and it would be a tough crowd. They would be throwing stuff at us. It was dangerous. We would play gigs where they knocked the entire stage over with battering rams.
wow.
Yeah, so it was tough. And that's you're talking about our influence from Detroit. Well, that was it. Hey guys, you got to toughen up, and we did. Even though we knew we couldn't outpower the Stooges, so therefore we decided we had to do something different to be able to follow the Stooges if that day ever came, and it eventually did. But we decided, well, we'll hang our singer, we'll electrocute our singer. So we had, and we did get more powerful rockers. But the Stooges, they would come on and nail you to the wall on the first song and the second and the third and the fourth. And after that, you're going, well, what else do you guys do? You know, it was it was just power, 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 power. Same with MC5. It was power, 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 and that's what the kids wanted. And so we tried to give them our version of that to an extent, but then we came in all glitzy and everything, and overnight, all of a sudden, MC5 were wearing shiny fabrics, and even Iggy had on silver lame gloves and all of that. So the exchange was great. I mean, all of the art that you have your influences, you see something else that you like, and you incorporate it in your own way, and so there was a healthy competition going amongst all those bands.
And in Cream magazine, was it a thing at this point when
It
it
was a
Cream started?
big thing. Circus magazine was really good for us too because
Okay.
it targeted the 18-year-old and younger crowd, and they were the first magazine to feature us over any other magazine. Other magazines at that time wouldn't touch us with a 10-foot pole, but they would have, and they would change. It would be like Dennis's favorite color is green, right? And it would be like that teeny bopper format, but then they'd have pictures of Alice, half guy and half girl, and so that we saved that magazine, so I understand, because all of a sudden they were the only source for our fans to read about us, and that boosted their subscriptions. Uh, and in hand, that helped our image because all of a sudden now the kids could read about us and get excited about coming to see us. Cream magazine was different. Jan Uelski is a great, great writer, and she's genuinely enthusiastic about music. In fact, she wrote the liner notes for this Love It to Death release that's out now.
Fantastic.
She
Yeah, we
interviewed,
spoke to Jan a few months ago. Of course,
uh,
she has the new MC5 book out with Brad Talinsky, and of course, talking, as no one else can about those cream days.
yeah, well, I wish Jan would have written the stories about us in Cream Magazine because Lester Bangs would come over and hang out, and we'd go out to lunch with him, and we'd shoot beer cans with rifles in the backyard for a whole weekend, and then he would pan our albums.
Oh,
But it didn't matter. Especially by the time we got to Detroit, we were living off of bad reviews. In fact, almost to the point where we would get a good review and worry. A
that's
bad review got our fans riled up.
yeah, that's for sure. It was at least exposure, whether they love you or hate of you, at least they're talking about you.
And that was always from the very beginning. That was our uh, aim. We didn't want anybody to walk out of an Alice Cooper show being indifferent. You either had to love us or hate us.
Well, that's it. That's it. The famous story about Shep Gordon first coming to see you guys in Venice and how you cleared the room, and that's why he knew it was something to take hold because it was decision making time. You loved it or hated it, and he could work with that.
That's right. Zappa was there and he walked out early and that worried me. And then the crowd lined up at the exits and they were still yelling insults at us. And I actually looked behind us at one point because I thought there was a fire or something. And Shep saw it and Joe Greenberg, who was his co-manager, it was like we walked off stage thinking, "Oh, we blew it." And then Joe Greenberg's like, "Hey, whatever it takes." We're like, "Well, we're going to need some better equipment," and Joe's like, "Whatever it takes, that's what we're going to do." And interestingly, I think miraculously almost, these guys didn't know anything about managing. In fact, I don't know if I should admit this, uh, when Zappa offered us 3 grand for a record contract, Joe and Shep thought we had to pay them.
Okay. Pay to play.
Uh, yeah, but that's what was great about it. They got, we were doing all of our theatrics on stage, but we were also with our promotion. We had the thing where we wrote up I think Joe Greenberg wrote this for us, but we decided, okay, we're going to have a press kit, but hey, 5 guys come from Phoenix, Arizona, and this and that. Okay, boring, right into the wastebasket. We're going to at least, if somebody's going to put our press kit into a bio, into a wastebasket, they're going to get a laugh first. So we came up with this thing where Alice's sister was a 16th century witch that was burned at the stake, and I was the artist of the courts, and Neil was the king of Atlantis, and on and on. And it stuck all of a sudden for a decade after that. Alice was a witch, and all of these interviews and stuff. So Joe and Shep got on board with that. It was like, Elvis and the Colonel. The Colonel was in Carnival. He did the thing with the hot tin plate to make the chickens move their feet. So he'd charge people to see chickens dance and stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
Well, Joe and Shep took that to heart, and we knew from things like you could read about the Rolling Stones in any rock magazine at the time, but to see them in newspapers across the country took them. They took a leak on a building in England, and all of a sudden it's it's jumping the shark and getting massive uh, coverage. So So we did things like we played at this place called The Experience. The front door looked like you were walking through Jimi Hendrix's mouth, and his face was painted all across the whole front of the building. And Jimmy would come in and jam pretty often, and all kinds of bands. Jim Morrison hung out there and all that. Uh, but we played there uh, on St. Patrick's Day. And so we decided we were going to have clear plastic pants. And so Cindy had to find clear plastic, and she made pants for everybody in the band. And uh, and then Joe and Shep called the Los Angeles Police Department and said, "You got to get down here and arrest these guys. They've got clear plastic pants." uh, you know, and it didn't quite work because right down the street was all the strip clubs and stuff, and who cared about us? But that was the kind of things that they were doing, and I thought it was very equivalent to the kind of things the band was already, believed in doing. So they fell into place as the perfect managers, and the most perfect thing with everybody in the band, everybody that worked for the band, and the management is that we didn't know the word no. We would never throw in the towel. The worse things got, the more we would turn them around to be in our favor.
Well, what's crazy is we're looking at the release of Killer after Love It to Death, and it's only 7 months later, and you're trying to figure out when did you tour and when did you start the next record? I mean, was that part of the agreement with Warner? Was it 2 records a year?
Well, let's face it, the Beatles set the bar high back then. And, it was like you always wanted to have a single on the charts. Uh, and also, the problem with that is if you had like three singles on an album, a lot of times the third one wouldn't get released because you wouldn't want that to be hot when you released the new album and that new single.
Yeah.
So Warner Brothers on Love It to Death, they had us first. They wanted to know that we had a hit. So I think we went in and recorded 4 songs, including "I'm 18," which was the very first song we recorded with Bob Ezrin.
Uh-huh.
And then when that became a hit, then Warner Brothers paid for the rest of the session to finish the album. But the other thing about that is from Love It to Death, we had a farmhouse in outside of Detroit, Pontiac, Michigan, near where the Silverdome was actually, but before it was built. And we had a garage that was a big room, and it was heated. And I can't say our house was had heat all the time because we couldn't afford to keep paying the oil guy or whatever. So so we had a rehearsal room that we could spend all the time we want and play as late as we wanted because uh, you couldn't even see the neighbors' houses back then. It's all Now it's all industrial area, but back then it was just open farmland. So we had that, and not only that, but when we were on the road, all we ever talked about was what we were going to do next and ideas for songs. And Mitch Ryder would come over to the farmhouse and bring his acoustic guitar, and we'd play until the sun came up. So it was just like that. That's all we thought about. We were driven. Uh, Even if we watched television, next thing you know, we'd see somebody would say something and turn into a song idea. So it was very uh, move fast because, like you said, the competition was heavy then. If you look at the charts and you look at all the bands that were out there, you had to fight tooth and nail just to stay alive.
Wow. So now, obviously, Rhino, the arm of Warner Brothers, your label, is one of the top, if not the top, of the reissue world, the archival world, and giving the people these deluxe versions of, your various albums. Um, Tell us about this new process. Did they have access? I'm assuming they did, to the original tapes. And what exactly is the process? What is available? And tell us your judgment. In a discerning listener, the difference between what you've heard before and this new product.
Yeah, I mean, before Rhino, it seemed like a lot of reissues were more like a money grab, where it would be the quality always seemed to be not quite as good as the original.
Yeah,
Uh,
they just
but
slap it
not,
together for another release.
not with Rhino. Not with Rhino. Rhino goes for the quality to make. So if a fan already owns Love It to Death album on vinyl, they're going to want to get this one because it sounds better. And the vinyl is heavy duty. I mean, this album is like this is a record that'll last for a lifetime easily because it's not thin plastic.
So they call
Uh,
it 180 grams or something.
yeah, and not only that, they care about giving you something extra in the package. Like in this, they tracked down the original notes about the songs that was on the outside of the original recording tape
Okay.
package to tell people, and it's handwritten, produced by Bob Ezrin, and then it has each song
Production
listed.
notes.
That's pretty cool because I saw that back when, when I went with Bob Ezrin when we went to the mastering place to master albums back in those days. And so I remember seeing it then, but it's been like what, 52 years or something since I've seen this, and they managed to track it down. So uh, Rhino is great. I mean, I have a lot of Rhino products, not just Alice Cooper stuff, and
Yeah.
I'm always happy with it.
Well, they are music freaks like we are, and they've got the corporate catalog, the vaults, the budget to give the people what they want. Might cost a little more, but bottom line is, what are your options? This is the only upgraded version of this record or the catalog that's available. And, for those that don't know, Rhino started as an independent company. Richard Foos and Harold Bronson, those guys, they ran a store in Westwood, Rhino Records, and they had their, music freak out on their sleeves, and were eventually brought into Warner to distribute, and then Warner made them an offer they couldn't refuse. So, they came from that indie spirit,
No,
and they've tried to maintain that as much as possible with the staff and the release schedule.
yeah, when CDs got so heavily popular, even Goldmine magazine, that was the Bible for vinyl
Uh-huh.
traders, was in jeopardy. They were going to fold. And then this vinyl resurgence happened, and it saved Goldmine magazine, turned them around, made them viable again. And I think Rhino had a lot to do with that.
Yeah. Well, it's very impressive what they did, and I spoke yesterday to a friend who used to run the Sony, the CBS legacy. CBS Records became Sony with the acquisition, but they have their division called Legacy, which is their reissue department, and he's got nothing but, mad respect, for Rhino and, what they've done. I think all the other majors try to catch up, you know. Matter of fact, I
Yeah.
remember Universal had their division. I don't know if they still call it that, but they called it Hippo, as a relation to Rhino, being another member of the zoo family. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if that lasted. They may have gotten a lot of pushback on that one. But
Well, it's good for the fans.
yeah,
It's good for the fans to have companies with integrity out there. But yeah, Hippo and Rhino, it's like, Dick Clark is the one that named Chubby Checker. and he
Did he?
and he said, "You need a name like Fats Domino."
Oh wow. Well, yeah, hats off to the late great Dick Clark, of course, filming all those American bandstands at the Prospect Studios in East Hollywood over in Los Feliz, and so many of those great shows like Midnight Special and all that. I know you guys were a part of. Were filmed right here in Burbank, which, for the longest, that's where Warner Brothers was based, and you guys would come visit the great
Yeah,
offices and Mo Austin and all the guys. Everybody was, musically, passionate, and
yeah.
that's where Rhino, came from.
We filmed scenes for "Good to See You Again," Alice Cooper at Warner's, one
Yeah,
of their big studios.
it's a
Yeah,
special place.
Burbank also was where we recorded "Pretties for You" in Burbank.
Okay, well, it's right up the street from where we speak. We love the not only the legacy, but it's still quietly known. Burbank is the entertainment capital of the world. You got the headquarters of Disney, Warner, Universal, NBC, ABC, Nickelodeon. I mean, they don't have a lot of fanfare. That's the real Hollywood. It's on the other side of the
Right.
hill over here.
And if you had a really good throwing arm where you could throw a stone over a mountain, you could from Burbank you could throw a stone and hit the Hollywood Bowl.
There you go. And the Hollywood sign. I always point to those that don't know. There's a radio tower on the hills right above Burbank. That is the tower that's above the Hollywood sign.
Yeah.
And you can't see the sign until you're above it or the other side. But that it gives you a point of reference. That's the Hollywood sign, which of course I know famously back in the '70s is it was very dilapidated, being an original wood sign that Alice and Hugh Hefner and a bunch of celebrities donated the $10,000, $15,000 per letter it took to rebuild, which is the indestructible sign that we have today. One of the most recognizable images around the world.
Yeah, I think Alice invested in the second O, the O on the right.
Yeah, there you go.
On the
But
far
the
right,
Ho- the
the
Holly
third O.
the Hollywood Bowl is right across the 101 freeway, Highland Avenue, from the Hollywood sign in the hills there. And of course, famously around this time, you play where the panties were dropped from the plane, and of course, more controversy and a fine that was well worth paying.
Yeah, backstage at that Hollywood Bowl show, after the show, Elton John came backstage and Shep was having a big showdown with the union, who was saying uh, that we didn't pay for a union guy with a shovel to clean up after the camel that Wolfman Jack rode out to introduce us, this camel. And the camel pooped on stage, and the union guy saying, you need to pay for a guy to you should have paid for a guy to shovel that up. And Shep is straight faced and telling him, no, we didn't want it cleaned up because we're a theatrical group and it's a cool night and we wanted the steam to show up in the lighting. And while they're having this big showdown, which Shep won, by the way, Elton John is there and all he could do is rave about our costumes.
Wow. Well, all hail the mighty Elton John, still doing it, and talking about Wolfman Jack, when you're talking about Canada being able to broadcast with more power from Canadian territory into the U.S., that back in the day, Wolfman Jack was hired by the Mexican stations. It started with an X. Famously, ZZ Top has a song called Heard It on the X. And they would be broadcast out of Tijuana and places like that. And used to be able to listen to Wolfman Jack on a like a summer evening. I used to pick it up in Montana, where my family used to vacation in the summers. But you could pick up those stations all across America, AM Mexican radio with giant transmitters.
Yeah, same thing like the opposite of Windsor, Canada. They had the massive transmitters. I mean, the legend is that somebody had a shack near that tower,
Uh-huh.
that broadcast tower, and that when they would broadcast at night, his bed springs would light up. But that had a lot to do with my rock and roll enthusiasm because my dad only country music on only Western movies on TV and only country music on the radio in the car. So we would drive from Phoenix, Arizona, all the way up to Oregon overnight. We'd drive straight through, and uh, and so Dad would say the radio had to be playing, or somebody had to be talking to the driver to make sure these alert and all of that. And so when we would get out in the desert and all of a sudden all these country stations would start, getting too much static, the only station we could get, I would hear that howl from howling from Wolfman Jack, and I go, great, because now I get to hear some rock and roll.
Yeah. What a character. I had offices at one point in the 80s at Hollywood and Vine, the Taft building, which is the southeast corner of Hollywood and Vine, right up the block from the Capitol Records Tower. And Wolfman Jack was my neighbor in the building. So he would walk down or take the elevator down to the lobby and walk out onto Hollywood and Vine, and boom, talking about an instant recognizable celebrity. Of course, Midnight Special made him indelible. Yeah, I love the speaking of Jack Richardson, the Guess Who did the song "Clap for the Wolfman." He would be mobbed, man. It was like everybody wanted to talk to Wolfman, and talking about a recognizable voice. I mean,
Oh yeah, and it's rare to have a disc jockey with a recognizable voice, but he was also in American Graffiti,
oh yeah,
which is that movie is so perfectly cast, and it's exactly like where when we were the Spiders in Phoenix, Arizona.
uh huh,
Central Avenue in Phoenix was where all of the cars cruised, the hot rods and the woodies with surfboards, even though we were in the middle of the desert for some reason. And all of those cars would cruise from the A&W, where you could pull in and have a tray hanging on your window and order a burger. And you'd cruise all the way up to the other hot spot, which was the VIP lounge where the Spiders were the house band. And all of those hot rods and cars would turn around that parking lot. But I swear, everybody in American Graffiti is somebody from that era that we knew.
that's amazing. So much history. The early 70s, again, we're celebrating Love It to Death. Came out March 9th, 9/71, and recorded at the end of 70. Talking about the turn of a decade. Boy, can't get much more than the beginning of the 70s. From Easy Action into Love It to Death. Changed your life. It changed all of us. We became music lovers of this crazy band of misfits from Phoenix via Michigan. Our special guest has been the one and only Dennis Dunaway. Look at his credits. He is the not only co-founder of the Alice Cooper Group, but a major contributor, the bass player extraordinaire. Many people have been influenced by him, and singing background vocals. So, man, Dennis, what a pleasure. Always talking about these great albums, the covers, the producers, the studios, the touring. I always say the music is finite. There was only so many albums, but the stories behind them give us so much more, appreciation for this music that you and Neil and Vince and Michael and Glenn made. So, hats off to you and your lovely wife Cindy and your bandmates, and we honor the late great Glenn Buxton, and can't wait for more. I know you're still in the universe with Bob Ezrin, so you never know what's coming down the pike. So, Dennis, thanks again for all that you do, all that you share with us, and we can't wait to our next conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jay. Always a pleasure.